It starts when Calypso has Ulysses trapped on the island of Aegea for 7 years, and all the gods are in Jove's house at Olympus and are debating what to do with him. I read the Samuel Butler translation, so throughout this video you'll hear me use the Latin equivalent names. It's Odysseus in Greek and Ulysses in Roman, although most of the characters' names stay the same. So all of them are there except Neptune, who by this point in the story doesn't like Ulysses that much. He's at a festival with the Ethiopians. The first third of the Odyssey is basically a flash forward. So Jove speaks up and he says, "Remember Aegisthus? How Mercury told him not to sleep with Agamemnon's wife, and then he did it anyway, and he killed Agamemnon. And people like this blame us for their problems, when they're the ones actually causing them." Minerva, she's the Roman equivalent to Athena, says that we aren't talking about Aegisthus, we're talking about Ulysses. Ulysses is sad and lonely, and he just wants to get home, and he was pious when he was at Troy, so they should really help him out. Jove then agrees with Minerva, but reminds her that Ulysses really pissed off Neptune when he blinded Polyphemus the Cyclops, but he's still on Ulysses' side. They agree to have Mercury go tell Calypso that she needs to let him go, and Minerva sets off to deal with a group of unruly characters who in the meanwhile have been trying to court Ulysses' wife, Penelope. When she arrives on Ulysses' home island of Ithaca, she disguises herself as Mintes, one of his old friends. These suitors are not behaving themselves very well. They're making a mess of Ulysses' home and they're eating all of his livestock. Ulysses' son, Telemachus, isn't doing anything about it, and he's thinking about how great it would be if Ulysses was back home, so he could kick all these people out of his house. Telemachus sees Minerva disguised as Mintes, and he says, "Hey, come in and have some food and tell me what you're here for." So they go into his house and they eat some food together, but then all the suitors suddenly show up, and they're singing and dancing and having a great time. This annoys Telemachus, who says to Minerva,
"Singing comes cheap to those who do not pay for it, and all this is done at the cost of one whose bones lie rotting in some wilderness, or grinding to powder in the surf. If these men were to see my father come back to Ithaca, they would pray for longer legs rather than a longer purse, for money would not serve them."
But the thing is, it's been 20 years. Everyone basically thinks Ulysses is dead. So Telemachus asks Minerva, who's disguised as Mintes, who they are, and Minerva says that she is the king of the Taphians and a friend of Ulysses. She asks Telemachus who all these guests are, and observes how nobody brought any of their own food to this gathering. She asks if there is some kind of wedding going on, and why everyone in the house is behaving so terribly. Telemachus answers by lamenting the fact that he doesn't actually know for certain whether or not Ulysses died at the sacking of Troy, or whether he's still alive somewhere. These suitors are just living in their house trying to court Penelope, who isn't saying that she will or won't marry anyone, because she's secretly holding out on the hope that Ulysses is actually still alive, all the while these suitors squat in her house. Minerva says to him, "If Ulysses is still Ulysses, he would make short work of these guys. But you should actually try and get rid of these people yourself. Call an assembly tomorrow morning and tell everyone that you need these guys out of your house. After that, I'll give you a ship and 20 men so you can set off in search of your father. You should check out the island of Pylos and find Nestor, and then go to the king of Sparta, Menelaus. They were at Troy with Ulysses, so if anyone knew what happened to him, it's gonna be them. And if he turns out to be dead, you'll have a funeral, Penelope will marry again, and you'll kill all the suitors, because you're 20 years old. You can kill these people yourself if you really have to. Remember that Aegisthus guy? Agamemnon's son, Orestes, killed him, and now everyone loves Orestes. You want to be popular like him, right? Now get to work." Telemachus is very grateful for all this. He asks Mintes to stay, but Minerva insists upon leaving. Telemachus is then thinking, yeah, that was definitely some kind of god I was just talking to back there. But I am going to do some stuff. I've had my call to action. So he gets to work, and he moves over to all the suitors. This singer called Thymius is singing about the return journey the other heroes from Troy went on, and as that's happening, Penelope walks down the stairs. She's wearing a veil, and she's crying because the song reminds her of her ill-fated husband, so she asks Thymius to play something cheerier instead. Telemachus tells his mom to get over it, and that other people surely died on the return from Troy, and that she shouldn't boss men around. She leaves, and he turns to the suitors, and tells them that they can finish their meal, but when morning comes he'll formally tell them to leave, and they'll have to eat at each other's houses instead. The most insufferable of all the suitors, Antinous, replies, "That's a lot of talk, but Jove willing, you're never going to be king like your father was." Telemachus brushes it off, and basically says that he just wants all of these people to leave his house. Another suitor, Eurymachus, asks who that stranger who just left was, and Telemachus tells him that it was just good old Mintes, and that his father is definitely dead, and nothing crazy is going on. But secretly, he's pretty sure that it was actually Minerva in disguise, and he's not exactly certain if Ulysses is actually dead or not. So the suitors enjoy their merriment for the rest of the evening, and go back to their own houses when night falls. Telemachus sleeps up in this tower in the outer court of the property, so he goes up to his room and he's got a lot on his mind, thinking about what journeys lie ahead of him. He gives his shirt to Ulysses' wet nurse, Eurycleia, and he goes to sleep. Morning comes, and Telemachus has everyone called to a big meeting, and Minerva intervened to make his appearance especially attractive for the occasion. This was the first assembly that had been called since Ulysses left 20 years ago, so expectations are high. Telemachus starts the meeting by complaining about these dastardly suitors, and he says that he'd take care of them himself if he were the man Ulysses was, but that he could never be of that stature. He asks for help from everyone gathered round, and then he starts crying. The suitors feel no empathy. Antinous insults Telemachus, and complains about how Penelope had been deceiving them. Penelope has been weaving an ornate funeral shroud to honor the passing of Ulysses, but every night she disassembles part of it so that she never makes any real progress, and in this way she can remain faithful to her husband. Antinous is really upset about this, and he promises to continue to abuse their home, so long as Penelope is available. Telemachus isn't going to have any of this, so he tells Antinous that he's not kicking his mother out of his father's house, that he foresees the death of Antinous in this house. And as he's saying this, 2 eagles, animals which are associated with Jove, fly down, glare at the people below, fight each other, and leave. The prophet Halitherses interprets this as the imminent return of Ulysses, and bad news for the suitors. Eurymachus says, "Go away. That's not real. Nothing ever happens. Don't listen to him. Actually, there's birds flying around in the sky all the time, and it doesn't mean anything. It's definitely just a coincidence. Ulysses is dead. You should be dead. Shut up." After saying all that, Eurymachus refutes Telemachus' request and says that the more he complains, the more the suitors will just hate him, and that there's nothing he can do to change their behavior. Telemachus is done arguing. He tells everyone, "Remember the gods who are watching, and waiting to enact their justice. In the meantime, I'm going to be off looking for my father." After this, a good friend of Ulysses, Mentor, who had authority over his property and Ulysses' slaves, rose to speak against the insolence of the crowd.
"Hear me, men of Ithaca. I hope that you may never have a kind and well-disposed ruler any more, nor one who will govern you equitably. I hope that all your chiefs henceforward may be cruel and unjust, for there is not one of you but has forgotten Ulysses, who ruled you as though he were your father. I am not half so angry with the suitors, for if they choose to do violence in the naughtiness of their hearts and wager their heads that Ulysses will not return, they can take the high hand and eat up his estate. But as for you others, I am shocked at the way in which you all sit still without even trying to stop such scandalous goings on which you could do if you chose, for you are many and they are few."
And so someone responds to Mentor, "Well, there's so many of the suitors, there would definitely be a lot of bloodshed if we were to take them on, even if Ulysses were here. So what can we really do about it?" By the way, Mentor's character is actually the etymological origin of the word mentor, as in an advisor. I thought that was interesting. So the meeting gets broken up, and can you guess where those unruly suitors went? That's right, they went to Ulysses' place and got back to roughing it up. Telemachus went by the beach and prayed to Minerva. Then Minerva, disguised as Mentor, came upon Telemachus and gave him some words of encouragement. She told him to be out at once, to start his journey swiftly, if he has to prove himself of the same stuff as his father. Telemachus then returned to find the suitors eating his pigs and goats. Antinous offered some food and wine to Telemachus, like they had when Telemachus was younger, but by this point, nothing is going to keep him from going on his quest. All these events aren't going over so well with the suitors. They accurately speculate that Telemachus intends to kill them, and that he may return from Sparta with soldiers, or from Ephyra with poison. But then someone says, "Hey, maybe he'll just die like Ulysses did. Then they could just divide his property and marry his mom." Telemachus visits his father's treasure room, where he calls the slave Eurycleia to him and requests that some of Ulysses' finest wine be sent, as he intends to sail to Pylos in Sparta. Eurycleia starts crying when she hears this, and insists that Telemachus not go searching after his father, because he's certainly dead, and his adventure would only serve to endanger his life. But Telemachus is confident that he has the sanction of the gods on his side, so he assures Eurycleia that he'll be safe, and he has her promise that she won't tell Penelope until some 10 or 12 days have passed, as to keep his mother from worrying. Minerva then personally intervenes by taking the shape of Telemachus and providing words of encouragement to each member of the crew before they departed. The goddess then made all the suitors fall asleep at their drinks, and in the form of Mentor, invited Telemachus to begin his search. They readied the vessel, raised the sails, and set off from the shore. Aboard, the crew made offerings to the gods, especially towards Minerva. So they sail around, and they reach the island of Pylos, and Telemachus is a bit nervous to speak to someone as old and important as King Nestor. Minerva tells him that he'll just figure it out. They show up at Nestor's abode, holding some offerings to Neptune, and then Nestor asks him if they're wanderers or traitors. Telemachus says that he's looking for Ulysses. He wants to know what happened to him, and that Nestor shouldn't smooth over any ugly details of his fate. The king replies and says that they were headed back when there was a dispute between Agamemnon and Menelaus, because Menelaus wanted to head home right off the bat, and Agamemnon wanted to offer up a big sacrifice to Minerva. So they split up. Half the men go with Menelaus, and the other half go with Agamemnon. Ulysses decided to stick with Agamemnon, and Nestor hasn't heard anything of them since he got back. Telemachus brings up his suitors problem, and Nestor provides some words of encouragement, but Telemachus doubts that his father could actually return home, even with the help of the gods. Minerva tells him that if the gods like Ulysses, then he should probably be okay, but the gods can't do everything on their own. Telemachus remains pessimistic, and shifts the subject over to the fate of Agamemnon. Nestor recounts the story. While Agamemnon was away fighting at Troy, Clytemnestra was wooed by Aegisthus. It took some time, as Clytemnestra had a strong character, and a bard had been left to guard her from any suitors. But Aegisthus had this bard abandoned on a desert island, after which Clytemnestra would court him. When Agamemnon finally returned home, Aegisthus killed him and reigned over Mycenae for 8 years. It only ended when the late Agamemnon's son Orestes came home from Athens and slew him. On the same day, Menelaus returned home from his voyage, so if you want to know the whereabouts of Ulysses, he's the one you need to ask, as he's only just returned. They all then drink and observe the sacrificial offering, and Telemachus and Minerva, disguised as Mentor, want to set off for Sparta, but the ever-hospitable Nestor holds them up. Nestor insists that they have some good beds and cloaks which they can use, and Minerva tells him that Telemachus should just go and take one of these beds while the crew sleeps in the ship. She then transforms into an eagle and flies away, astonishing everyone and filling them with confidence in the knowledge that the gods were on their side. So they go and drink some more and make an offering to Minerva, and then they all go to sleep. In the morning, they sacrificed a cow and ate some of it. King Nestor sends Telemachus off to Sparta with a lot of wine and food, with the journey there being mostly uneventful. So Telemachus reaches Sparta, and King Menelaus is holding 2 weddings, one for his son and one for his daughter. It's a nice big wedding, complete with a bard and everything. Telemachus and Nestor's son, Pisistratus, are seen by one of Menelaus' slaves, Eteonius. Eteonius asks Menelaus whether he should tell them off, and Menelaus calls him an idiot and tells Eteonius to receive them like dignified guests. Telemachus and Pisistratus are brought into the courtyard, and they're impressed by how beautiful the house is. They're taken in, cleaned up, and Menelaus greets them.
Fall to, and welcome. When you have done supper, I shall ask who you are, for the lineage of such men as you cannot have been lost. You must be descended from a line of scepter-bearing kings, for poor people do not have such sons as you are.
Telemachus whispers to Pisistratus just how much he admires the house of Menelaus, and Menelaus overhears them, and says that he would gladly have just 1/3 of his riches if it meant that he had never departed to Troy and all of his friends were still alive, chief among them the missing Ulysses. Hearing of his father, Telemachus would cry and shield his face with his cloak. Menelaus wasn't sure if he should continue or ask Telemachus what's wrong, while Helen began to walk down the stairs and take a seat at the dinner table. She wondered who these 2 were and thought that she recognized Telemachus. Menelaus also thinks that this guy is Telemachus, so Pisistratus explains who they are and why they're searching for Ulysses. Menelaus, upon seeing the son of his long-lost friend, laments just how little they have prepared for the visit, and how he should have been spending time with Telemachus in the past. At this, Telemachus, Helen, Menelaus, and Pisistratus all start crying. Pisistratus brings up his brother Antilochus, who died at Troy, which Menelaus praises. The king then tells everyone to stop crying and get back to eating their dinner. Helen then spiked the wine with a drug she got from an Egyptian woman, which is able to keep people in good spirits no matter what, and she began to recount her experience with Ulysses at Troy. Ulysses had entered the city in disguise as a beggar, all full of cuts and bruises, and was only recognized by Helen herself. She questioned him, but Ulysses had her promise that she wouldn't tell the Trojans about his disguise. Menelaus then said, yeah, that sounds about right. Ulysses was quite the character. He remembers a time within the wooden horse, when Helen, who thought that there might be some people hiding inside the horse, and was working for the Trojans at the time, she mimicked the voices of the soldiers' wives to see if anybody would respond. No one did except for the stupid Anticlus, whose voice was muffled at the last second when Ulysses clamped his hands over his mouth. They go to sleep, and the next morning Menelaus asks Telemachus more about his problems, and Telemachus elaborates on the misdeeds of the suitors. The king predicts their fate.
So these cowards would usurp a brave man's bed? A hind might as well lay her newborn young in the lair of a lion, and then go off to feed in the forest or in some grassy dell. The lion, when he comes back to his lair, will make short work with the pair of them. So will Ulysses with these suitors.
In regards to the fate of Ulysses, Menelaus remembers what he heard from the old man of the sea. Back when Menelaus was on his return journey, he was stuck on the Egyptian island of Pharos for 20 days. He and his men only survived through the intervention of the goddess Eidothea because she just liked Menelaus so much. She told him that if he could find Proteus, also known as the Old Man of the Sea, and her father, then he could learn how to get home, as well as find out about some other going-ons in the world. And the way you get this guy is by waiting until noon, when Proteus rises above the waves and enters his cave. When you come upon Proteus, you have to grab him and hold him tight because he's going to try and transform himself into different kinds of animals, as well as fire and water. But if you just hold him tight enough, you can get the information you want. So Menelaus waited with 3 of his best dudes until noon, wearing some sealskins Idothea brought them, by which they could disguise themselves as his seals. The skins were real stinky though, so Idothea also put some stuff under their noses to get rid of the smell. Come noon, the old man of the sea came up from the water, counted his seals, with Menelaus and his men among them, and he went to sleep. Going according to the plan, the 4 of them seized and held Proteus, as he turned into a lion, a dragon, a leopard, a boar, as he turned into the water, and as he turned into a tree, but despite everything, he wasn't able to shake off the men. Very annoyed, Proteus asked them what they wanted, and Menelaus says, "You know what I want. How do I get home?" Proteus tells him he's gonna have to sacrifice a ton of cows all the way back in Egypt, which is very disappointing to Menelaus because Egypt was a long way back. But Menelaus also asks if all of his friends managed to make it back home, and Proteus is like, "Okay, but you're not gonna want to hear this. Remember Ajax the Lesser? The gods tried to kill him at sea, but he escaped to the island of Gyre, where he then stupidly bragged about how the gods couldn't kill him, so Neptune split the island in half and he drowned. This kind of situation might come up again later in the story. And Agamemnon? Aegisthus saw him coming home, so he had him invited to a feast, where 20 hidden warriors sprang out and, of course, killed him. Menelaus cried after hearing about this, but he also asked what happened to Ulysses. Proteus tells him that Ulysses is, in fact, alive, but is bitterly trapped on Calypso's island with no way to return home. After recounting the story, Menelaus insisted that Telemachus stay another 10 or 12 days, but he wanted to go home, as his men were growing wary. Meanwhile, the suitors are throwing discs in front of Ulysses' house when Noemon asks Antinous if they knew when Telemachus would get back from Pylos. Everyone is surprised when they hear this because they thought that Telemachus was still on Ithaca. Antinous is really concerned when he hears this, and he wants to know everything about Telemachus' journey. He and Eurymachus are pissed off, and Antinous says, "Get me a boat and 20 men. I'm going to wait for Telemachus to get back and kill him as he's passing by." But the servant Medon overheard this whole conversation and relayed it to Penelope, who also didn't know Telemachus had left in the first place. Penelope falls upon the floor and cries, where she is joined in crying by all of the maids of the house. Penelope then goes to Ulysses' father, Laertes, for help so that the people of Ithaca might come to Telemachus' rescue. Euryclea tells her that she knew of Telemachus' quest, but didn't tell her because he made her promise not to. And the maid tells Penelope that she shouldn't bother Laertes because he has a lot on his plate already, and that praying to Minerva is the best thing that she can do. So Penelope stopped crying and went upstairs with her maids and prayed.
Hear me, daughter of Aegis-bearing Jove, unweariable. If ever Ulysses, while he was here, burned you fat thigh bones of sheep or heifer, bear it in mind now as in my favour, and save my darling son from the villainy of the suitors.
As this is happening, the suitors are all feeling very smug, with one of them saying, "Hey, would you get a load of this? The queen is about to marry one of us, and she has no clue that we're about to kill her son." Antinous then tells them to shut up, lest their evil plans be overheard. So he chose 20 men to go after him, and they sailed off. That night, Penelope was drifting off to sleep when Minerva appeared in her room through the appearance of her sister Euphemie. Penelope explained how worried she was for Telemachus, and then the apparition told her that Minerva would be with Telemachus on his journey, and that this vision itself was actually sent by Minerva. Hearing this, Penelope asks if Ulysses is still alive, and the vision says, "I'm not going to tell you that," and it vanishes. But Penelope was feeling much better after this.